Folk chat people. It's your brother Beniti Amaray, back with another post. What I kind of want to talk about today, something we kind of been discussing. Well, we discussed 2 weeks ago on the radio show Awakening Universal Minds that we do. We were talking about inner alchemy of the mind, or alchemy for self-transformation of your DNA. If you missed this past Thursday's show, we got a little bit deeper into it. We had Brother Panic on. It was a 5-hour show. Go back and listen to it in the archive when you get a chance. We covered a lot of topics. But 2 weeks prior to that, we went through some information from the Emerald Tablets that I kind of want to touch on and kind of go through for those that didn't get a chance to get that information. Again, I'm going to be taking some excerpts out of the book, and I definitely recommend individuals seek this book out and get it. It's the Emerald Tablet, Alchemy for Personal Transformation. The name of the author is Dennis William Huck. You can get it on Amazon for a few bucks. But we're going to build on a few sections of information from the Emerald Tablets, Tahuti, a section called Conversations with Tahuti. What we're going to establish here, and I think when we're constantly talking about the concept, not going outside of yourself to understanding the keys to the universe, to understanding creation, we have to get out of our mind. Some individuals that are in spiritual consciousness are still making, for an example, the Egyptian deities and the Egyptian doctrine. They're trying to link it and nail it down as if these individuals were one specific deity at one specific point in time, or they were actual literal beings, and not understanding that they were representations of the archetypes that exist within our DNA. Now, what I mean by that is so people don't get confused. When you're tracing, for an example, Egyptian history, when you start with who they call the royal or the holy family, which would be Aset, Asaro, and Heru, or who they call in the Greek Isis, Horus, Isis, who they call in the Greek Isis, Horus, and Osiris. From that point on, the actual blood or family or physical lineage starts. When you deal with the pantheon of the Egyptian deities, you can't get caught up in the fact that these were actual literal beings. Now, I know people will come with the concept that Thoth or Tahuti, who taught the Atlanteans, if you deal with the concept of Atlantis, was it real or not? Some people have their debate on it. And some people believe in the school that the ancient Atlanteans taught the ancient Egyptians. Well, bottom line is, it goes back even prior to that. It goes back to the Neolithics, who we call the Pygmies, and the Watusis. It all connects to the original bloodline of these ancestral beings, whatever title we want to give them. But again, these are archetypes that are represented within our DNA. Tahuti or Thoth is an energy. We're going to show you that. This is why a lot of the deities represent an aspect of nature or creation, because they represent that energy. So there was multitude of different manifestations of the Tahuti energy, going back from just as recent as Greece, when you deal with the individual Belinus of Alexandria, Hermes thrice. We've heard the story of Hermes in Greece, Thoth, and then going back to Tahuti or Zahuti of the pre-dynastic Egyptians. So we have to understand, and there was priesthoods set up to teach individuals in the mysteries of those doctrines or the energies that these specific schools taught about. But anyway, to help understand that, to help understand that, to help overstand that, we're gonna go through a portion of a document from the tablets called the Conversation with Tahuti. Okay? And let's begin. It says, tell us how we can be of one mind. If you have your thoughts and we have ours, if that were true, we wouldn't need to question you. Okay? this is the format of this, so you understand. That question that was just read is going to be posed by the priesthood of Tahuti or Thoth, and then this would be Thoth or Tahuti's response. The response is, we are all of one mind, though it has not yet dawned on you, and all questions and answers are known to the one mind. Okay? Thus known to you, yet your sight is veiled, and you perceive only the shadows and not their source. I speak from the light, as one who has seen, and though residing in shadow and in light, we are still of one mind. So, quite simply explained here, there is no separation of this thought process. When tapping into the divine consciousness, it all is one emanating source, but broken down into different degrees of vibration, which creates the illusion of separation. This separation in tune created what we see today, many different dogmas, philosophies, doctrines, religions, cultures, because they've taken that one source or that one thing and they've broken it down into so many different fragments and pieces, causing the confusion that we see amongst us today when dealing with spirituality. Now, when dealing with spirituality, don't confuse that with knowledge and intellect. People get confused with that because people get more caught up in the intellect and the knowledge and the information of things, which we need to a certain point. But dealing with the spiritual, which bypasses all that, when dealing with the spiritual realms, the astral realm, it bypasses all that. So your emotions, your humanity, and your getting stuck in the realm of intellect can kind of get you confused. Okay? So we can't, I don't want to say confuse the two, we've got to know how to assimilate the two. Because people tend to deal with information based on how they react emotionally to it. And we also have to factor in the concept of perception. Everybody's perception on how things are perceived, especially when it comes to information, is going to vary from person to person depending where they are in their spiritual journey or their evolution. So we have to keep that in mind. Just because you are perceiving something one way doesn't mean that another person is perceiving it the same way. And it doesn't mean you're right and they're wrong, or they're wrong and you're right. It just means it's varying different degrees of vibration, which is in turn deciphering what type of perception is being perceived on that information. That's it. Now we have to come to grasp with that, because when we start categorizing and separating right from wrong, that's where things go haywire. This is how religions, lies, and corruption will start and spread. Alright, so let's go to the next section. It says, we mean no insult, or why should we believe you? After all, you are known as a notorious trickster. Now, the priesthood of Tahuti is saying that to Tahuti because in dealing with the mystery schools of Tahuti, Tahuti is known to put individuals through challenges or tests to see if their character can overcome obstacles and the challenges and the tests one face in life to perfect themselves and make themselves a perfected being. Because once you take on a certain level of information, or you take on the understanding of it and you perceive it as being your reality, you usually will get tested on the reality of that. So Tahuti is known for doing that in the mystery schools of ancient Egypt. Here's his response. To trick those who hide is no deceit. Some of those who are foolish or fearful may even enter into the light and see with their own eyes and verify these truths themselves, and finally serve the alchemy of their being. Nor would it be possible to lie when speaking of these highest things, for only they are the thoughts of only one mind. So, a couple things being conveyed here. Tahuti saying, I can't trick you, because all these thoughts come from the one mind, the same source. There's no separation. So how can I trick you from something that has its origin in the same source? That's number one. Now, when he goes and says the alchemy of their being, this is a statement we need to grasp onto here for a quick minute. And when we see that word and break it down in the English language, it has root in two words. Al, the word chemical or chemistry is in there. Okay? So you're seeing, or dealing with the term alchemy of your personal being would be the transformation of your DNA philosophically, and when you're seeing regular alchemy, as we know scientifically, it will be transferring, for an example, lead-based elements into gold or other minerals or minerals. When dealing with the scientific aspect, when you deal with the science of the philosopher's stone, it correlates the two. Okay, this is talking about that transformation of your DNA, the inner alchemy of your being. And again, the word chem, also back in the Semitic language of Aramaic Hebrew, chem, ham, or who we also know in the Bible as the prophet Ham in English, the translation would be cam or chem, which means black. And al or el is the definite article in the Arabic or the Hebrew language, which simply means the. So you're saying the chemist, literally. And this is why you'll see in those who so-called deal with Egyptology, one of the names that they refer to as Egypt is Al-Kam, and I tell them that's incorrect, because when you still use the word Kam or Al-Kam, you're still tying back into the Hebrew doctrine, because you're tracing it back to Ham. And I know people say, well, out of Noah, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, this is who Egypt migrated out of. But when you're explaining that from a biblical context, it's still tying you into the biblical story. So Egypt, as I've explained before, is also an incorrect name, because Egypt is the Greek word Egyptos, which just simply means burnt faces or burnt. And when the Hindu invaders and the Turkish invaders came into Egypt and mixed in with the ancient Nubians, they called them Egyptos or Egyptians because the sun burnt their faces. So if you want to get down to the essence of it, or the inner alchemy of your being, you have to be correct. You can't just gravitate towards a term that you're comfortable with, because your humanity or your human nature kind of makes the decision for you. Whereas if you're dealing with the inner alchemy of your being, you deal with the essence of it. So Egypt is wrong name. Egyptos or Egypt is the wrong name. Al-Kham isn't the correct name. Then some will say Tah-Ma-Re, which represents the elements, sun, earth, water. That was one of the ancient names, and it predates way before the Greek word Egyptos, Egypt, and it even way predates the term Al-Kham. Then the word Tar was another ancient name for ancient Egypt. But in essence, it goes back prior to the pre-dynastic Egyptians, because I said once you start dealing with the Neolithics, the people that occupied what we know today as the Nile River area, and this was prior to there was any Egyptian pyramids or what we know as Egyptian culture today, it would go back to those bands called Pygmies and Watusis. Humans have to label or identify something to feel comfortable with it. So when we say Egypt, it's easy for us to identify with everything that comes along with Egypt. When I make a statement and say you can't put a time frame on existence when the existence of the original people have been around since time immemorial, some people aren't comfortable with that, because it doesn't categorize, it doesn't categorize or put it in a box to identify it, so people don't feel comfortable with it. But anyway, so when you deal with the inner alchemy of your being, the only way you're going to transform your DNA is to get back to the very core and essence of these divine realities. Alright, next section. You keep mentioning the one mind. Do you mean God? This is a very interesting response. So here's the next question to Tahuti. Here's his response. The gods you worship, he's talking to them now, are all part of the one mind. But because you must name your gods, you cannot know God. Well, let me finish, and I'll talk on that. I kind of just touched on that a little bit. By naming God, you only create yet another God. Only by being in an ineffable presence of the divine can you know the one God. And for that reason, I do not call God by name, but refer only to where God can be found in the one mind. We kind of, in essence, just talked about it, but let's expound on it a little more. Okay? Let's take the first sentence here, and it simply says, okay, The gods you worship, okay, as said here, are all part of the one mind. They don't exist outside your mind. It's all connected to the mental reservoir which links you in to the divine consciousness of all. Okay? But because you must name your gods, you cannot know God. This is what humans do. The term God itself, as we know in the original language, comes from the German word Gott, okay? And it comes from 3 Greek words, or the abbreviation for 3 Greek words: G, representing Gumar, O, representing Oz and Dabar, D, representing Dabar. Gumar, Oz, Dabar. Strength, beauty, wisdom. This was something intentionally done by Europeans to throw you off track and to take you away from the closer representation of the energy of the Creator. Obviously, if you reverse that word, you get the word dog, and that's not a coincidence. We know one of the things that Europeans hold in high regard are the dog. We also know it represents the Egyptian jackal of the dead, Anubis, and this is also why a custom that was instituted by Europeans, wearing black to funerals. So this kind of connects to that. That's not what was done in our ancient cultures. It was the reverse. We wore white, which represented purity and transition to the next spiritual realm. Most people don't have a full understanding, or overstanding. For an example, why do Christians or most monotheistic religions wear black at funerals? And people don't realize that comes from Anubis, who is always represented. Actually, if you look right behind me, you see the statue of Anubis. He's always represented as the black Egyptian jackal dog who represented the deceased, who was a connection to the underworld, taking them to the realm of Osir or Osiris. Now, these represented things that took place during your spiritual transformation, or what we falsely call physical death. But that's getting into another story. So we again, the alchemy of your personal being. Okay, this is what we have to focus on. So it says, by you naming God, which humans do, as we just talked about, you create another God. So now you're creating a separation yourself. So with all these terms, okay, and I'm going to explain this, and I've said this a million times, you can't give a title to the divine, to the Creator. You have to get out of your mind that the Creator is a physical being. You have to stop giving the Creator gender. There's no such thing. When you're dealing with etheric energy, the vital life force, whatever term you want to give it, there is no gender when you transcend the physical realm and start getting into the higher planes. It's just manifestations of energy. Now, when you study the planes and you deal with metaphysics, the reason why God is referred to a he in all your holy books, the Bible, the Quran, etc., is because the masculine or the male gender manifested first on the mental plane. The female gender manifested first on the physical realm. Yes, and it's a scientific fact that females were on the planet first long before men. Okay? Now, what the Bible authors and the religious scholars did in a male chauvinistic dominated world, the authors were the ones that penned God as a he, establishing the dominant control of male domination. And that's why religion, as you get further into the Bible, and especially in modern day Islam, is always belittling the woman as second rate, as if the man was first. Fact of the matter is, it was the other way around. Through carbon dating, fossil dating, and a detailed study and research of the mitochondrial DNA, scientists have simply found out that the mitochondrial DNA, which only exists in the female and in very minute traces in the male, is the oldest DNA on the planet. And that's a scientific fact. So all your religious holy books are incorrect. They need to be redone. So when you're reading those fictitious, phony stories about the creation of Adam, which there's confusion in that, and I don't want to get into too much religious bullshit, but there's confusion in that, because when you're reading in Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 to 28, it talks about male and female being created, the masculine and the feminine energy, and said God blessed them and told them to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Go back and look at this in your Bible. This is in the first chapter, 26 to 28, Genesis. And he gave them dominion over the fish of the sea, blah, blah, blah. But the key word is replenish. The Hebrew word for that, when you look it up in the Blue Bible Concordance, you can look this up anywhere, the word is morle, to refill. As I said, if you're drinking a glass of water, I might have said this before, or a bottle of water, I can't remember if I said this before, and that bottle becomes empty, you ask for what? A refill. So there was something there already. So the Bible is telling you in that story that that's not the beginning. That's one of the many replenishing periods that took place on this planet. Then when you get into the second chapter of Genesis, you see separate creations of the male and the female energy. You see the male being created and the female again. So the question I've always posed to religious scholars, who was created in the first chapter of Genesis? Because male and female were already created together. And then in Genesis chapter 2, it gives you two separate creations of the male and the female. So what the hell are we talking about? Okay, but anyway, that's more nonsense and confusion. But just thrown out there to dispel the myth of this whole creation story. So now, simply says here, when you name God, you create another God. So when you say Yahweh, you say Allah, all these titles, which that's exactly what they are, titles that we have to give the Creator, or the energy, the divine consciousness that we have to make physical, because we as mortals don't feel comfortable if we don't take that and make it into a physical being. You simply create another God, and you start. This is how your religion start. So you have one religion that feels the correct pronunciation of the name is Allah. That would be your Muslims, translated as the life giver, as some say. Then you have the Hebrews who will use the term Elohim, which that in itself is a problem, because Elohim means these beings. That's plural. Then you have some will say Yahweh or Yahuwah Elo, or he who is who he is, the source. Okay? Titles, human attributes. Then you get into the very poor modern day translations, which would be incorrect because there's no letter J in the Hebrew alphabet, so there's no such word as Jehovah, which is a poor translation of Yahweh, and Yahweh is a poor translation of Yahuwah. Okay? And these again are just titles and attributes that humans created to try to categorize what they call God or the Creator. Then you have some of the so-called Jews back in the day who just simply didn't even want to mess around trying to figure this shit out, so they just used the term Hashem, which just means the name. Okay, all are wrong, all are incorrect, because again, it's just further proof of humans categorizing and trying to name the Creator, and in that process, whether they're not aware of it or not, they've now created another God, and you can't do that. Okay? This is where the confusion and the chaos comes in. You can't do that. If these individuals ever knew the correct name of the source, okay? Think about this for a minute. If your name is John, okay? People say they call upon the name of God, and I'm going to show you how they don't. If I was in the same room with you and I said, "Hey, John," guess what you would do, John? You would stop, turn around, and acknowledge me, because for that moment, I commanded your attention. For that very split second, that's all it takes. Okay, very split second. Now, if any of these so-called religious fanatics really knew the name of the Creator, they would command the Creator's attention for that very split second and moment. And if you believe in the ideology that God is the omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, then the world and creation would cease to exist if you knew the name of the Creator and you called upon Him and He stopped for that very moment to focus His attention on you. Guess what would happen? Think about it for a minute. It just doesn't make no fucking sense. It's stupid. So, again, that being presented to you to show you how humans need to trivialize and make things mortal to make themselves feel more comfortable in dealing with their spirituality or their concept of who and what God or the Creator is. Okay? So you can't name the Creator. And when I'm saying Creator, I'm not talking about some old man concept, some God sitting in heaven in the sky and ruling over everything, because then you're still under the spell of faith, belief, and ridiculousness. Okay? Because you can't think outside a person, place, or thing if in your mind you still believe the thing that is responsible for everything that exists in the universes is some old concept deity sitting in the sky somewhere and ruling down on the planet Earth. That shit is just straight comical if you believe that. That's kindergarten shit. We're grown-ass adults. It's time for us to navigate away from the kindergarten and the fairy tale stories and deal with the reality. And as I've recently said on a class I did, it might have been on Facebook, I can't remember. There is no doomsday, apocalyptic, end of the world, biblical apocalyptic event coming. This was created by the authors that wrote the Bible. There is no Jesus that's going to come out of the sky and save you and rapture you up because you've been a good boy or a good girl, and all the bad boys and the bad girls are going to go to hell. That's a bunch of mythological nonsense and bullshit. There is no spook God going to come out of the sky and wreak havoc on the earth and take up the 144,000. These were concepts that were created by the biblical authors. And when you're reading these stories, they were intentionally created to enslave people and keep them in a state of fear. This is not going to happen. And if you believe it's going to happen, you're going to be long dead and gone, and this same nonsense is going to be passed down to your children, their children's children, and their children's children's children. The only way we break this cycle of bullshit is by addressing it and clarifying the nonsense. All those stories were taken from stories in cultures that predated what we call monotheism. And they just put their little twist and spin on it to create fear and enslave the minds of individuals that follow these established religions today. Alright, so we go to the next section here. If God is in the one mind, which is above, then the devil must be in the one thing, which is below. Aren't the above and below simply what we conceive of as heaven and hell? What's the response to this? Such labels are inventions that serve worldly ends. We just talked about that. Humans need to create these concepts to make themselves feel comfortable. So Tahuti's basically saying that's straight bullshit. For the true above and below are living things beyond description. In my tablet have I revealed all that can be spoken of these unlimited regions. The above is the abode of one mind, and the below is the abode of one thing. You need know nothing more, because nothing more is knowable. You cannot label the ineffable, meaning you can't put a title on something that just has existed or is existence itself. Because once you put a time frame on something, now you are being held to the point of a beginning and an end. What do I mean by that? For a religious person that says God created everything, and when you read the Genesis story in the first chapter, it says in the beginning of what? Because then an intelligent person would ask, well, how did God get there? And a spooked out religious person would simply say, oh, God just is. He just was. Keep using the term he. He just always existed. So they don't really have an explanation. So that's why you can't put a beginning and an end on it, because now you have to be held accountable and be able to explain. And it's a cop-out just to say, well, God just is. Well, anybody can just say that shit for anything, in any concept, dogma, philosophy, culture, or religion that they deal with. If you don't know an answer to the question, just say, oh, it just is. It always was. So it's a convenient scapegoat. Tahuti is saying right here, okay, these, you can't put a title, okay, on what that one thing is, because you trap yourself. Alright, then it goes on to say, Work instead with the tiny spark of consciousness of which you are possessed. That spark can be fanned into a blazing gnosis that burns away the falsity of your tragic self-deception. Thereafter, can you verify for yourself that of which I speak? You can behold the one mind, you can touch the one thing. So if you deal with that spark of consciousness that you have, it can burn away all the falsehoods and the illusion, and that consciousness exists within the subconscious mind. You heard us use a term lately in a lot of classes that we've been doing, and on the radio show. You have to reprogram the subconscious mind in order to really understand what went wrong. Meaning, from birth, we've been taught wrong. And that has to be reprogrammed. That has to be changed. Everything we've been taught up until the point we came into consciousness was incorrect. And it takes a lot of deprogramming and reprogramming to do to get the mind to vibrate and operate on the correct frequency. That's what this is talking about right here. That's the level we need to be on. That's the true inner alchemy of your being. And it all exists within the mind. The one mind is connected to all. The first principle of Tahuti, when dealing with the 7 principles of Tahuti, as we said before, is the doctrine of mentalism. All is one. One is all. All is the mind. The universe is mental. When you understand really what that means, you'll be able to make that divine connection. This is what Tahuti is trying to say in here. It's the one thing. You can't separate it. Okay? Let's go on to the next section here. You mean we can travel in the above and below? And in the above and below as you do? How can that be? We are mere mortals. Does this now also represent human beings today? How they're always doubting themselves? How they can't recognize and see the divinity that they have that exists within themselves? That their insecurity leads them to faith-based spookism, ghost and goblin religions and doctrines that they worship, and instead of them accepting and realizing the divine that exists within them, they want to go give their energy and their soul to some spook or spirit that doesn't exist outside of themselves, called God, Allah, Jehovah, Yahweh, Elohim. And then they want to go into these spook places of worship where mentally dead people reside, because that's where, when you go into any of these monotheistic places, and especially the Christian churches, because there's mentally dead people residing there, because they're dealing with a mentally dead doctrine that is not living, because they're constantly talking about dead things, dead people, and dead concepts. So rather than human beings recognize the divine in themselves, now they're going to go pray to some spirit that they can't confirm exists, called God. So now you give your spiritual energy to nothingness, and it evaporates into the atmosphere. And basically, that energy goes for naught. Because rather than you recognize the divinity that exists within you, you want to try to find it somewhere that exists outside of you, and you never will. This is why 2 things usually happen. 1, a person becomes so engrossed in religion, they become such lunatics and fanatics based on their high levels of insecurity. And they stay in it for long periods of time for security reasons, subconsciously, whether they're not aware of it or not. Then you have the other individual who can't stay in it because they see the problems with it, and it's not fulfilling or answering all the desires and the questions that they have in their life. Now, either these people leave or some just stay because out of guilt, because maybe it was a way that they were raised, so they feel they need to do the same thing because they were raised like that. This is a certain mental conditioning that's done intentionally. So if you don't get in tune with the inner alchemy of your being, you can get lost in the shuffle. Very important to understand that. So then it goes on to say, listen carefully. Here's his response to the question. So we can travel above and below as you, but we are mere mortals. Listen carefully. Thought is a bubble of being that erupts on the fabric of reality. through the pattern I have revealed in my tablet. Thus, are you as mortal as your thoughts? Say that again. Are you as mortal as your thoughts? Let me finish reading this. We're going to talk about that real quick. And it is your notion of heaven and hell that keeps you earthbound, because it weighs you down with fear and duplicity. The things thereof I speak are everywhere under your nose. You have only to reach out to touch them. But out of your arrogance, you have denied the one mind, and out of your fear, you've desecrated the one thing. This is powerful right here. Let's touch on this for a quick minute. This is powerful. Okay. Thus, you are as mortal as your thoughts. So when you say, no way, it's not possible, no, I don't believe that, no, that sounds too far-fetched, no, that's too way out there, no, that's impossible, then guess what?